everybody. I'm Allie. I am a nutritionist and a yoga teacher, and I'm so excited to be here. It's Monday to talk nutrition. So I'm here weekly to talk nutrition topics. This week, I'm very excited, first of all, because we're in a different location. We're on vacation in the San Juan Islands, and it's just lovely up here. And second of all, I'm excited because we're going to be talking about the nutrition label, which is something that I love to talk about and I love to look at. And so it's just a great combination. So welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. So let's talk nutrition label from this beautiful home that we are visiting right now. So I want to talk about this because love the new location. Oh, thanks. I know, me too. We want to stay. We have a nice view of the water right outside the window. It's just lovely. So anyway, I got some feedback that whenever I have talked about the label, that people want to know more. So here we are. Let's talk all the information about the label. So I'm going to use these garbanzo beans as a frame of reference during the show, but I also have some other examples that we will be discussing. So we're going to talk label. We're going to talk about ingredients at the bottom of the label. And then I'm going to give you my recipe for roasted garbanzo beans. Since we were using the can of garbanzo beans, we thought, why not make roasted garbanzo beans? Here we go. Hold on. It's always backwards. Okay, there we go. So let's talk label. So it's always important to start from the top, go from the bottom, but then you always have your sections that you always want to look at too. So like I always look at fiber, I always look at ingredients, I always look at protein. So today we're just going to cover the whole thing. We're going to use this as a frame of reference, but also talk about some other labels as well. So let's just get started. So nutrition facts. Every food product has to have the label. And they all have regulations on, there are regulations on what always has to be listed. So to start, the top part is always going to say how many servings there are per container. So this, for example, these garbanzo beans, there are 3.5 servings in here. And I know some of this might be review for a lot of you, but we will discuss things that may come as a surprise. So this has 3.5 servings. So that's 1 1/2 cups, or 1 1/4 cups. Yeah, 1 1/4 cups total. So if you're planning on eating this whole can, then you would multiply all of these numbers by 3.5. So there's always the servings per container, which is also good to look at for things that are really delicious, like ice cream. Like how many servings? Like a pint usually has 4 servings. Although when you eat it, it feels like it should be less. So then serving size. 1 serving size of beans here is 1/2 cup, which that goes pretty fast. So that's good because this has a lot of good stuff in it. And just also as a side note, if you want to ask any questions or comment, please feel free to put them in the chat. I love comments and questions. And I do want to back up. I also remembered that everything on this label is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, which isn't necessarily the amount of calories that everybody consumes. Some people have less, some people have more calories, and so that's also something to keep in mind, that this is always going to be based on 2,000 calories. And if you want to find out how many calories you should consume, there's a really good website, and it's www.choosemyplate.gov/resources/my-plate-plan. That's a lot. So I can repeat it. choosemyplate.gov/resources/my-plate-plan. And it's great because it asks you your age, your gender, your weight, your height, and your activity level. And then for women, it asks if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. And then it calculates what your calorie needs are to maintain whatever your current weight is. So some people might need more than 2,000 calories. Some people might need less. But that's just something also to keep in mind, that these numbers are based on that, especially the daily values section, which we will get to in a moment. Can you share on here, please? Hi, Ellie, loving the info. Great. Hi, Myra. Hi, parents. Thanks for joining. Yes, I can. I actually can add that because I'm sitting closer to the computer than I usually do. choosemyplate.gov/resources/my plate plan. Let me make sure I did this. choosemyplate.gov resources. Yes. There we go. So it's great. It's a great website. And then it also tells you how many servings of everything. So if you're having 2,000 calories, how many servings you should have per day. So for example, it said for 2,000 calories, you should have 2 cups of fruit, 2.5 cups of vegetables, 6 ounces of grains, 5.5 ounces of protein, and 3 cups of dairy. Sure, no problem. And so everything's in cups, but I think what they're meaning is servings. So for example, like 1 serving of fruit would be a cup of raw or frozen fruit, or 1/2 cup of dried. Same thing for vegetables, 1 cup of raw or cooked, or 2 cups of leafy greens. 1 ounce of grains is a slice of bread, or 1/2 cup of cooked rice or pasta or quinoa or whatever. So it's really nice because it gives you how many servings you should have of everything and what a serving actually is. So I recommend the website for sure. So back to the label. So anyway, we'll go back to here. I'm going to talk about some things and we'll talk about it and then we'll come back. So they also have a decent smartphone app as well. Oh, good. That's good to know. I hadn't looked at that. I hadn't looked into the app, but yeah, that seems like it might even be easier. If somebody looks at it, let me know. I would like to know more about it. So, serving size. That's really good to know. And sometimes for me, it's helpful if I measure just to see what it looks like. You don't have to do it every time, but just like once to see, like, for example, we're going to be talking about granola in a little bit. And usually the serving size is like 1/2 cup or 2/3 of a cup. And that's really not that much. That goes so fast, especially when it's something delicious. So measuring it once is always a good idea. Okay, 1/2 cup, 1 serving. Next is calories, which we all kind of know that. And that's always printed very large as well. So you can always see that. All right, now we're going to get into the section of total fat, cholesterol, sodium, all that kind of stuff. And then the percent daily values, which I want to talk about that first. So percent daily value is basically a reference amount of how much of a nutrient that you should consume per day based on 2,000 calories. So, for example, this says you should have 2 grams of total fat, which is 3% of your daily value. And I did a little calculating because I love doing math. And 3% of the daily value means that if 2 grams is 3%, you should be getting 67 grams total of fat per day. So these numbers, these percentages. There are some of these nutrients that we want to eat more of and some we want to eat less of. So I'm going to give some examples. So the next thing in the list is saturated fat. This says 0 for garbanzo beans. But for a 2,000 calorie diet, you should be getting 20 grams or less of saturated fat. So it's always something, saturated fat, added sugar, and sodium are 3 of the daily value percentages that you're going to aim to have less of, just because they're the things that aren't as great for our health. So saturated fat, 20 grams per day is the recommendation, or less. You can always have less. And that is also something to look for on the label. So the total fat's always going to list saturated fat and trans fat, which trans fat is also, we pretty much always want that to be 0. And most food companies have taken trans fats out of foods. But if you see partially hydrogenated oil listed in the label, then that means that there is trans fat in here. And even if it says 0, They're allowed to say 0 if it's 0.5 or less per serving. So it's possible that if there is partially hydrogenated oil, that there will be some trans fat, but they can say 0 because it's less than 0.5. So that's just something to keep in mind. Something to keep in mind. So they always have to have saturated fat, always have to have trans fat. Cholesterol, this has 0 because it's a plant-based product. Cholesterol only comes from animal products. So carbs are great for 0 cholesterol, and it's 0% of the daily value. And typically they say to consume no more than 300 milligrams of cholesterol per day, preferably less. So that's something to keep in mind. And let's see, sodium is next. So this has 130 milligrams, which is 6% of your daily value. And the recommendation for 2,000 calorie diet, if you don't have high blood pressure or have to watch your sodium intake, is 2,300 milligrams or less. So the less processed food you eat, the less sodium you're going to eat too, unless you add a lot of salt to your food. But still, it's gonna limit it. So that's something to also keep in mind. 2,300 milligrams or less. So this has, 6%. So let's talk about percentages too. Oh, hello. Thank you. I think that's Ivory. That's my guess. Hi, Ivory. So let's talk about percentages. So if it's 5% or less in the daily value section, the percentage of daily values, that's considered low. And then if it's 20% or more, that's considered high. So I'll give a couple of examples. I love visual aids. Let's see. So we talked about the 3 things that we want to be low: saturated fat, sodium, and what was the third one? Trans fat. Added sugar. We didn't talk about that yet. Sodium, chicken stock, is my example here of a percentage that is high. So sodium per serving here has 440 milligrams. So the sodium is right there. Hopefully that is clear. And that's 18% of the daily values. So they say over 20% is high, but 18 is high-ish. So 440 milligrams, if you're supposed to get 2,300 per day or less, that's taking up a lot. Does draining the beans help? Yes. Yes, it does. It doesn't take away all of the sodium. Very good question. Thank you for asking. It doesn't take away all the sodium, but it does take away some of it. Draining and rinsing. Rinsing is key as well. Or you can buy, I don't think Trader Joe's has it. You know that I shop there a lot. You can buy cans of beans that are low sodium or no salt added, and that reduces the amount of sodium for sure. Or cooking them from scratch or from dried. Also, you can definitely limit the amount of salt if you cook them yourself. So, yes, draining and rinsing helps, but there is still some sodium that has been absorbed into the beans. So, sodium. So, chicken stock is also one of those other things you can also buy low sodium or no salt added, and that can greatly reduce it. Greatly reduce it. So, keep that in mind. Okay, let's see what is next. Let's look at the label. So we did cholesterol, we did sodium, total carbs. This is a good section. So, total carbs here, it's 20 grams. That's 7% of your daily needs. I also calculated this. So if that's 7%, if 20 grams is 7%, then that means you should be getting 285 total grams per day. So that's not taking up too much of your percentages. And 7%, not bad. Okay, dietary fiber. So carbs always list, the total carbs always list fiber, total sugar, and includes added sugar, which we'll get into all 3 of those. So dietary fiber, we know that we should all be eating lots of fiber. And the recommendation for 2,000 calorie diet is getting at least 28 grams per day. at least. So this example, 4 grams in one serving, you're getting 14% of your daily value, which that's pretty good. And if we're talking about doubling, or if you're going to have more than one serving, then you can double those daily value percentages. So if you have 1 cup, which would be 2 servings, you're going to get 28% of your daily value of fiber, which that's great. That's, you're already more than 1/4 of the way there for the day. So that's good. That's good. So fiber, we want to have at least 28 grams. Next is total sugars, 3 grams. Total sugars includes all sugars. So if it's something that has fruit, or like, for example, beans, anything that has natural sugars, total sugars is going to include the sugars found naturally in the food, and also the added sugars, which this has 0 because there's no sugar added to these garbanzo beans. But that's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to give an example. So let's say the total sugars is 15. And then let's say the added sugars is 7 grams. Then 8 grams of that is going to be from the natural sugars. So the total sugars always includes those added sugars. So that's not on top of the total sugars. So that's kind of good to know, because you don't want to think that the added sugar is adding more to the total carbs. The total carbs includes all of the things listed below: the fiber, the total sugars, and the added sugars. So let's talk about added sugars. We talked about that a little bit in a previous episode, but I do want to bring it up again. I have some visual aids. So, granola. Typically we think of granola as kind of a healthy food, but almost always, there's added sugar. So this example has, let's see, 1 serving is 2/3 of a cup, which isn't very much. So it would probably be like half of this glass. 2/3 of a cup is 1 serving. Total carbs, 41 grams. Dietary fiber, 4 grams, that's pretty good. Total sugars, 15 grams. Total added sugars, 15 grams, which means, oh, hi, Mercedes, thank you for watching. Total sugars, 15 grams. Total added sugars, 15 grams, which means 100% of the sugar that's in this was added. So the ingredients: whole rolled oats, milled cane sugar. So sugar has been added. And that's 30% of your daily needs. So added sugars, the recommendation is 50 grams or less if you're having a 2,000 calorie diet. And 50 grams, I feel like, is generous. We should definitely aim to have less than 50 grams. This, 15, you're already 30% of the way there by breakfast time. So, although this is delicious and I love it, just keep that in mind. So an alternative would be, rolled oats. Rolled oats, total carbs, 31. Dietary fiber, 5 grams, so 1 more gram of fiber per serving. That's good. Soluble fiber, they don't have to list soluble and insoluble fiber, but they did here, just because it has 2 grams of soluble and 3 grams of insoluble. Total sugars, 0. That's good, which means that the added sugar will be 0. So way better, of a healthier option if you're looking to limit your sugar. This versus the granola. Or you can always make the oatmeal, but then add just like a sprinkling of the granola to the top. That's an option. Gives a little crunch. You still get that delicious taste of the granola, but just not eating quite as much of it. Okay, I have my little table here of visual aids next to me. Okay, what's next? Okay, protein is next. This has 7 grams. And so you'll notice that that is not something that has the percent daily value because there is not a standard set for the daily value for protein because people vary that amount so much. The only time they have to do that is if the company is claiming that it's a high protein food or if it's something, a food item that is intended for 4-year-olds or younger. They have to list that. So I didn't know that. I just found that out in my research and I thought that was pretty interesting. So that is something to consider as well. And then, so those are the main components of the label. And then this section, I feel like we don't look at it quite as much, but it has the vitamin D, the iron, the calcium, and the potassium. And those percentages there are also percent daily values. And I want to do a little comparison. I thought this was fun. So let's see. NBC News, Healthy Trader Joe's products, nutritionists swear. Oh, good. Oh, that's great. I haven't seen that article, but thank you for putting that. I'm going to have to look at it since Trader Joe's is my spot to get most of our groceries. So I wanted to compare garbanzo beans and black beans. Whoops. It's always opposite. Okay. Garbanzo beans and black beans for the iron section. I thought for sure there was going to be more iron in black beans than garbanzo beans, but not the case. So iron has 1.4 milligrams, and that's 8% of your daily value. That's pretty good for a vegetarian food. And for black beans, iron was 1.1 milligrams, and that's 6% of your daily value. So 2% difference, but that's significant-ish, I guess. And then there was also a big difference between the potassium. Potassium in black beans, 330 milligrams, which is 8%. Potassium in garbanzo beans, 230 milligrams, which is 4%, so half the amount. So that's something to think about. And then there's also vitamin D. This doesn't have any. And there's also calcium listed. So all 4 of these down here, these nutrients are listed as well. And those are the percent daily values if you're looking for that information. I always like to look at calcium too. So that is pretty much the label. And then we also have the ingredients to talk about, which I thought was interesting. But before we do that, I want to talk about the garbanzo beans that we made, or that I roasted this afternoon. So here, I'll show them to you again. These are like greatly crispy garbanzo beans. So I drained the beans and I forgot to keep the aquafaba, which we did talk about that in another episode. And I thought, shoot, because I've been using aquafaba to make vegan Caesar salad dressing, and it is so good. So tune into the aquafaba episode if you're interested in finding out other things to do with it. But anyway, you drain the garbanzo beans, rinse them, put them on a baking sheet that's lined with parchment or foil or whatever you use to line your sheet. And then add olive oil, sprinkle of salt, preheat the oven to 400. I forgot to mention that. Bake them for 20 minutes. Stir, shake, bake them for 10 more minutes. Stir, shake, bake them for 5 more minutes, and then take them out and let them sit for maybe 5 minutes, and they are just perfectly crispy. You can put cayenne on them, you can put curry or pepper, or you can actually make them sweet and put like cinnamon and other things. So let's see, I see Myra has a question. If we use fresh beans, would the numbers change on the nutrients? The sodium definitely would change. Almost everything else would be the same. I'm going to have to look that up for like iron. I don't know if that makes a difference, like being in the can or not. I don't think so. But that's a really great question. But yeah, sodium would definitely be less. But like the carb, protein, and fat would be the same for sure. And calories would be the same. And the serving size would be half a cup. But yes, let me check on some of the other nutrients, but all the main ones would be the same. Minus sodium. So let's see. So we just did the recipe for this. now let's talk about, two other things, and then we'll talk about the ingredient list because I found some interesting stuff. So some labels have the dual column, it's called dual column label, or some may even have more than that, where you see this, like one serving, and then you see like the total servings, or total nutrition information for the whole package. So like an example would be like pretzels. Like if you buy one of those party packs of, one of those like party packs of pretzels, where the bag is maybe smaller than or bigger than one of those snack sizes, but smaller than one that you would share with people. So it usually is like 2.5 servings. So they'll put like the nutrition information for servings and then the nutrition information for the entire bag. And those are always really helpful, especially if it's something that you would eat all of, so that you don't have to do the calculating yourself. It's just good to know. So that's interesting. And then this was also an interesting thing I found. So single ingredient sweeteners, such as maple syrup, don't have to list added sugar because they don't want it to be confusing that that more sugar was added. So, for example, this is pure maple syrup, and so one serving, which is 1/4 of a cup, has 52 grams of sugar, and that would be 52 grams of added sugar because that's all it is 100% sugar or sweetener. But if something like, for example, like the Mrs. Butterworth or one of the syrups where it has more than one ingredient, so it has like the syrup and then maybe like high fructose corn syrup and other things added, then they would put the added sugar, I believe, because there are multiple ingredients. So that's just something interesting. So like honey, things that are just one ingredient, agave nectar, maple syrup, they don't have to put the added sugar. So if you're looking for it, they don't have to, because you can just assume total sugars and added sugars would be the same. So there's that. So the ingredients section, as for most things, how can nutrition be a label? How can nutrition be a label? Well, it's the label of the facts, I guess. But yeah, that's a good question. The ingredients. So we always want to be looking for products where, first of all, you know the ingredients. My son just woke up from his nap and he's waving. That's really cute. Okay, let's see. Nutrition-wise, cooked and canned are about the same, but the sodium content of canned beans can be 100 times that of cooked beans. Draining and rinsing the canned beans can get rid of about half the sodium. Oh yes, so the no salt added. Yeah, that's always better if you're looking for to reduce your sodium from beans. So ingredients, you always want, ideally it to be a minimal amount of ingredients and things that you can pronounce, and the amounts. So the way things are listed on the ingredients is by amount. So whatever's listed first, that's the most of whatever the ingredient is. And the last thing is the least amount. So, of course, the first ingredient in the garbanzo beans is garbanzo beans. And the second ingredient is water, and the third ingredient is salt. So it's by volume. And so, like for this granola, for example, the first ingredient is rolled oats, which that's good. But the second ingredient is sugar, milled cane sugar, which means that volume-wise, that's the second highest amount of volume of something in the ingredient list. So keep that in mind. And I did also want to quickly talk about added sugars. Not added sugars, natural flavors. So when something says natural flavors, that just means that it originated from a plant or an animal. That's it. But then it's usually for flavoring. So they create these substances by heating or roasting the plant or animal product, and then they extract it with enzyme. They use enzymes to extract the flavor out of it. And after that process, it could contain more than 100 different chemicals in it. Not all 100 chemicals, but they could use any kind of chemical to alter the flavor or change the flavor, or add or whatever, put preservatives or solvents or anything like that in it. So something could originate from an animal or a plant, but then it's processed so much that in all my research, I basically found that, which you may or may not know this, but artificial flavors and natural flavors are pretty comparable because of so much processing and so much that goes in between the process that things can originate from something great. Like there's something called citral, which originates from lemongrass or lemons or orange or pimentos, and it's used for a citrus flavoring. But there's a lot of processing in between that part. But a lot of this, I had a list of chemicals that I was looking at, but they can just say natural flavors, but actually it's something. Oh yes, you're welcome. Thanks for watching, Mercedes. So anyway, natural flavors is a little bit of a tricky marketing term that doesn't really mean that the end product is natural. So I think we've covered a lot today. Lots of labels, lots of numbers, lots of information. I'll post my recipe for the roasted garbanzo beans on Instagram tomorrow. @AllieShercliffe is my Instagram name. And thank you all so much for watching, for the comments, for the questions. Thank you for joining me on vacation. And we'll see you next week. I'll have a different topic. So happy Monday, happy evening. Thank you, everybody, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Okay, bye.